This season's case is about a bunch of cases, and they are all attributed to one man, Peter Piper. You haven't heard of him, have you? I'm guessing that you, like I, would remember a career criminal who shared a name with the subject of a childhood tongue-twister nursery rhyme. That Peter Piper, by the way, was actually a French pirate and horticulturalist in the 1700s. He raided spice stores so that he could plant the seeds in his garden in the Seychelles, hoping to make spices more affordable and available to the average European. Kind of a Robin Hood of the spice world. But our Peter Piper, for the purposes of this case study, had none of the whimsy of a spice pirate. No, our Peter Piper was a vicious rapist and liar who would not have had the chance to rape any more women or kill a newlywed couple if his life sentence had been treated as it should have been. Instead, his jailers gave him free rein of the place, and that included the keys. From a December 1988 article titled, "Double Killer Gets 25 to 40 Years." Judge Lawrence Root says the reservations about accepting a plea bargain for Peter Piper in the slayings of a young Manton couple were outweighed by just one factor. I feel quite confident that he will spend the rest of his life in prison. The 25 to 40-year sentence was for the murders of Richard and Alida Thompson. These slayings were committed a year after Peter Piper escaped in 1983 from a Lake County jail where the state prison system had moved him to relieve prison overcrowding. He was recaptured in 1985 and then later, while finally awaiting a court appearance for the murders, he escaped again, this time from the Osceola County Jail in Reed City. Fortunately, that time he was recaptured before he could kill again. There is certainly a lot to peel back here in this case, so we are going to start with putting a fine point on the vicious rapist and compulsive liar part, since that is what put him in jail in the first place. To do that, we have to travel back in time to March 10th, 1966. Two men walking near the Bestwall Gypsum Company in Grand Rapids saw a woman stumble from a wooded area near a paved road, waving her arms and trying to yell to them. We're going to call her Mary for the purposes of maintaining her privacy. To get a sense of how surreal the scene must have been, I want to describe the area. Bestwall Gypsum was a company that developed a decorative vinyl-surfaced wallboard made of gypsum and touted it as having extreme durability. Gypsum is hydrated calcium sulfate. It was first discovered in West Michigan in the late 1820s near Plaster Creek. The company itself sat on a huge expanse of land west of where the Gerald R. Ford Parkway is now. Technically, it sits within the city of Walker to the north, but basically it's sandwiched between Walker and Wyoming, Michigan, which is to its south in Grand Rapids. The area is partially wooded and dotted with sand pits, which rest above an old mining area that dates back to the 1800s, made up of about 6 miles of underground tunnels that cross between Walker and Wyoming and stretch down to Granville. Once upon a time, gypsum was mined here. Dynamite was used to blast it loose, and then it would be hauled to the surface via the underground mine shafts, which explains why, on the diagram in the Walker police report, there are 2 dynamite sheds shown near the scene of the crime. The assault itself occurred on a dirt 2-track road well off the main paved road, which is called Butterworth after R.E. Butterworth, who opened the first gypsum mines north of the Grand River. Obviously, the men were horrified by what they saw that day. Mary was beaten so badly, both of her eyes were swollen shut. Her face was badly cut and bleeding, and she had teeth missing. When they came upon her, the poor girl was covered in blood and only wearing 1 shoe. The crime scene photos, they paint a stark image. On either side of the dirt road stood barren trees that hadn't yet filled with spring's promise of leaves. It's still cold, and you can tell that because the officers in their crisp uniforms are wearing wool coats as they kneel to measure the length of road from a spot in one of the tracks to a large rock that they would use for their baseline measurements. One officer takes photos with the type of camera that most of us associate with those old-time reporters who are hot on the trail of a story to fit into those old true crime or celebrity gossip magazines. The kind with the attachable flashbulb that goes pop when an image is captured. Further into the wooded area next to the two-track road, school books and papers are carelessly strewn aside and appear to be weathering a gentle breeze. A few pages are slightly uplifted, arcing in the wind. Some bear smudges of what look to be blood. And there's a purse that lays atop the pile, next to what looks like a fashion magazine of the day. I don't know if she saw any of that, or even realized where her belongings were when Mary regained consciousness. She got up out of the dirt and started walking back from the direction she remembered they had come, not realizing that she was wearing only one shoe until she got a little ways down the road. The men helped her to the company office where she recalled sitting down on the floor. The men got her into a chair, and when the officer arrived and asked her if she had been raped, she said yes. Because of the extent of her injuries, it was difficult for the men to understand her, so she motioned in the air with a finger and drew the letter P. She said Peter Piper. The sergeant radioed a team to proceed to the home of Peter Piper, while the other officers headed to the area from which the men had seen the young girl emerge to ascertain the exact location of the crime and immediately secure it. What they would find was her blood on the ground, the school books and papers strewn aside, as I mentioned. They found her other shoe, a loafer, a broken charm bracelet, and a scarf, as well as 2 of her teeth lying feet apart in the dirt, as if she had shed those items as she stumbled to safety. They also found her shoe prints, along with a heavy boot print and tire tracks, all of which would later be photographed and plaster casts made for evidence. Later that day, when describing the incident, the inspector of detectives, a Mr. Walter A. Gilbert, would say, "It is the worst thing I have ever seen." 2 Grand Rapids police officers went to the residence of Peter Piper's sister, and she told them where he worked. She also confirmed that he drove a 1950 white over green Chevrolet. Piper lived upstairs at the same property, while the downstairs was occupied by his brother. They were told that Piper left for work that morning around 7:15. Meanwhile, Mary was being questioned at the hospital in the presence of her mother by Vice Squad Captain Francis Pierce. By this time, police had delivered the teeth they had found on scene, because the staff at the emergency room suggested they might be useful in repairing the girl's mouth. The vice captain learned that Mary had 4 puncture wounds to her abdomen and 3 to her neck, which they believed to have been made by a small pocket knife. She also sustained a severe beating to the face with a blunt object, and it was confirmed that there was evidence of rape. It was here that Mary first relayed her story. "What school do you attend?" "Catholic high school." "What grade are you in?" "I'm a junior in the 11th grade. "How old are you?" 17. "How were you getting to school that day?" "By the city bus." "Where do you catch the bus?" "At the corner of Hugert and Granville." "Did you go to that corner that morning?" "Yes, I did." "At what time?" "I must have left the house at 10 after 7, I think. The bus comes at 15:15. "What were you wearing when you went to school?" My school uniform. What kind of uniform is that? A white blouse with a navy blue jumper, knee hose, my mohair sweater, and my car coat. Did you have any books with you? Yes, I had a notebook and a few textbooks, but I'm not sure which ones. It might have been a religion book and possibly English or maybe biology, but I'm not certain at all. Did you have any jewelry on? Yes, I had my watch and a ring on, but I'm not certain whether I had my bracelet on or not. Sometimes I do and sometimes not. Sometimes I put it in my purse. What happened at the corner? I was waiting for the bus and a boy that I knew drove by and he went around the block a bit. Did he stop? Yes, he stopped. What did he ask you? He asked me if I needed a ride to school. What did you say? I looked down the street and the bus wasn't coming, and I told him I would. I decided to save my bus fare. Did you get into the car? Yes, I walked over to the car and I was thinking I hadn't talked to him for a long time and I was wondering how come. I said hi to him and he said hello. He offered me a ride. What was his name? Peter Piper. How did you know Peter Piper? About 2 winters ago, I was going around with this boy and we used to double a lot. I knew him before when I went ice skating. Sometimes he would walk home with me. When was the last time you saw this boy before Thursday? I saw him on the Monday before. Where? Downtown. Where downtown? Right where I catch my bus. Is this a different bus than you take from your home? Yes, this is the one that takes me from downtown to school. Did you have any conversation with him at that time? Yes, he asked me if I wanted a ride. What did you say then? I had already paid my bus fare, so I told him no. What did he say? He didn't say anything. Did you see him between Monday and Thursday? Yes, I saw him Wednesday riding around town. At what time? I'd say about 7:20 or 7:25. Did you talk to him at that time? No. Did he see you downtown at that time? Yes, he stopped right in front of the bus. He stopped to let me cross the street. What kind of car did he have this Thursday? It would be an older Chevy. I don't exactly know the year. It was dark green on the bottom and it had a white top. Now, referring to this Thursday when you got in the car? Yes. What conversation did you have when you got in the car? Well, when he asked me to ride Monday, I thought maybe it was because he had some family trouble and he wanted to talk about it. When I got in the car Thursday, I asked him about his wife and I thought maybe that was why he wanted to pick me up. I asked how he was and he said fine. I asked him if they had children and he said no. And I asked him where he lived. From where did you start driving? The downtown area, toward downtown. From what street? Granville Avenue. How far on Granville Avenue did he go? As far as Pleasant Street. Then where did you go? There was a train coming and he turned up Pleasant thinking he could get ahead of the train. How far did he go on this street? As far as Oakland, and then on Oakland he had to wait for the train again. What conversation did you have? We just talked about his wife, whether she was working and where they lived. Were there any other topics of conversation? He asked if I was going with anyone. What did you say? I told him no. Where were you driving then? He asked me if I had to be at school right away, and I said no, and he said he had to visit a boyfriend. When we didn't go directly to school, I thought we were going to the boyfriend's house. Was this before or after the train?
Just before.
After the train passed, where did you go?
He went as far as Wealthy. I think it was Wealthy. I'm not sure. There was a bridge, and he crossed the bridge right where all the streets crisscross, by the gas company or whatever that is.
Then where did he go?
He turned right down the first street past the river.
What street was this, do you know?
No, I don't know.
Then where did he go?
I wasn't paying attention after that.
What direction were you going?
To me, it was toward my grandmother's house, but to you, I guess it would be toward John Ball Park.
Then where did he go?
We passed John Ball Park, and he started going up the paved road past the Coca-Cola Company, the road that goes to Johnson Park.
Where did you go after that?
Well, we passed the 2 factories. Then there was a sign. Right before the sign, he made a turn down a dirt road.
What kind of sign was this?
It was a yellow sign pointing out that there was a curve ahead.
Do you know what street you were on?
No, I could guess that it was Johnson Park Road.
Johnson Park or John Ball Park?
Johnson. It was right about in the middle because Johnson Park is out near 28th Street and John Ball Park is in the city.
Did you go right or left on the dirt road?
Right.
Were there any other landmarks as you approached this road?
There was a factory just before the road, 6 or 7 car lengths before the road and on the other side of the factory.
Do you know what kind of factory it was?
I thought it was a plaster company, but I don't know for sure.
What was your conversation?
Nothing. Nobody said anything. I was just going along for the ride, and he was going to his boyfriend's house. There was nothing to talk about.
Would you describe the way he was driving at this time?
He was driving fast, like he was in a hurry to get to his boyfriend's, but I thought it was because I told him I wanted to get to school.
How fast was he going on this road?
Quite fast. I don't know. I would say quite fast.
How fast did he drive in town?
To me, it was fast for being in town.
Now, when you went on the dirt road, where did you go?
Well, we went a few car lengths, and then I remember a little shack or a shanty, and I remember the road for it. I don't know whether it was before or after the shack or not.
Was the shack on the right or the left?
It was on the left.
How far from the intersection was the shack?
It was quite a ways, but still it wasn't real far.
Was it a mile to the shack?
No.
Half a mile? Less than half a mile?
I don't know, a few 100 feet maybe?
What happened when you got to the fork in the road?
At the time, I thought we had turned down the drive going to his boyfriend's house. When I saw the fork, I realized it was just a road, and I talked to him again.
What did you say?
I looked at him, and he was driving fast, and I told him I didn't believe him. I said, "I don't believe you."
What did he say?
He said, "You don't?"
What did you say to that?
I didn't say anything.
What did he do?
There was a hill he had to get up. It was quite steep, and after he got over the hill, there was quite a little slope, and he stopped, and he turned off the key, and he sat there for a few minutes just looking ahead, and he turned to me, and he said, "Give or walk."
What did you say to that?
I told him I would walk.
Did you say that right away?
Yes, I did.
Do you know what he meant when he said give or walk?
At times it was just a joke between the kids, but he meant either let him have intercourse or else walk the distance home.
What did he say to you after that?
Just kept yelling at me. "Are you going to give? Are you going to give?" I took hold of the door, and the door went open, and I was telling him, I'll walk.
What was he doing?
He was trying to hold me, and at the same time he was trying with his hands to pull down my pants.
Did he kiss you at this time?
No.
Did he get your pants down or not?
Not right away, but he started working them down. I heard some ripping.
Was he doing this with both of his hands?
No, just one. He was trying to hold me down because I was fighting him.
How was he holding you down?
By my throat. He was holding my throat.
What hand was on your throat, his left or right?
His right.
Was it his hand or his arm?
It was his hand.
Then, after you said these times that you would walk, what happened then?
I realized that he had no intention of giving me the choice, really. He wanted to do something to me, and I was fighting him.
How were you fighting him?
I was trying to push him away from me, and the door was open on my side, and I was trying to get out.
Did you try to get out the door?
I couldn't push him away.
Were you screaming?
Yes, I was yelling that I'd walk, but he wouldn't let me go. I remember something else, too. I think that, I'm not sure, but I think that when he was holding me back and fighting me, I said something about, if you just let me walk, I won't tell anybody. I'm not sure, but I might have said that, let me alone and I won't say anything.
Where were your hands when you tried to push him away?
On his shoulders.
Were your hands on his head or his face?
No, I never scratched him or anything.
What was he wearing at this time?
His boots, they were green and yellow. He was wearing green and yellow boots.
What kind of clothes did he have on?
I never bothered to look.
What was he doing with his clothes at this time?
Nothing. He was just trying to work on my pants and pull them down.
Your underpants?
Yes.
Then what happened?
He finally put both hands around my throat. I was still screaming. He said, "Are you going to give? Are you going to give?" I was real scared, and I finally said I would, and he let go, and I fell back a little bit.
Then what did you do?
I fell back on the seat, and he pulled down my pants and started pulling down his.
Did he have a belt on?
I don't know.
Did he pull his pants off?
No, just down.
After he pulled his pants down, what did he do?
Then I knew it was serious, and then I was sorry that I had said okay, and I told him excuses.
What excuses?
I told him that I had to go to school, and I told him that I had my period.
What did he say when you told him you had to go to school?
He said, "No, you don't."
What did he say when you told him that you had your period?
He pulled my legs apart to look, and he said that I was lying.
Then what did you say?
He started to get on top of me, and I was still screaming, and I said something about, aren't you going to use a rubber? And he told me he was sterile, and that was why he didn't have any children.
Where were you lying in the car?
My head was toward the steering wheel, and my feet were by the passenger door.
On the seat?
Yeah. Yes, on the seat.
After he looked at you and said that you were lying, what happened then?
He got on top of me.
What did he do when he got on top of you?
He put his right hand, the arm part, just below the elbow, against my throat, so I couldn't get up, and with his other hand, he was trying to have intercourse with me.
Where was his left hand?
Between my legs, he was trying to work himself into me.
What do you mean by working himself into you?
He was trying to put it in the hole.
Can you just say what you mean?
Well, I mean his sexual masculine parts.
Was that his penis?
Yes, I imagine it was.
And do you know if his penis was hard or soft at the time?
Oh, I don't really know. I haven't ever done anything like this.
Do you know what I mean?
I didn't put my hands down to feel. I was fighting him, and I didn't know the difference. I I really don't know what I mean either.
Did he touch you with his penis?
Yes, he had it part of the way in me.
Where in you? In your own words.
Between my legs. Inside my female sexual parts.
How far would you say, in your opinion, did he have it in you?
I never had intercourse. It was painful and I was screaming and kicking. I don't know how far. It was far enough to hurt, and he couldn't get it any further because I was tight. He was trying. It was small there, and he couldn't get it any further, and it must not have been very far.
Well, did he have it in you at all?
Yes, I don't think there would be pain if it was just by my legs. He had it part way in me.
Do you know what it means for a man to have a climax?
Yes.
Do you know if he had a climax at this time?
I don't think so. I was fighting. He was trying to get himself in me. It didn't last long. I screamed and he just got mad and stopped.
When you screamed, what were you saying?
Just, it was painful. I hadn't done anything like this before, and I wanted him to stop. When he stopped, he put both hands around my neck and he said, "Don't scream. Don't scream." And he was choking me.
Then what happened?
He got off of me, and I couldn't breathe, and I couldn't fight him off. I closed my eyes, and I went limp, and I pretended I had fainted. He choked a little longer, and then he backed on his knees out of the door.
Where did he have his hands on your throat?
I don't know, around my neck.
Was he choking you, or did he just have his hands there?
He was choking me.
After he let go, what happened then?
I felt the air coming to me again because it had been cut off, and I wanted to be quiet so he wouldn't know I was alive, and I looked a little to see where he was, and then he took hold of my ankles, and I felt myself being dragged out of the car.
And then what did he do after he dragged you out of the car?
Well, he was dragging me out of the car, and I might have passed out because I don't remember hitting the ground, but I couldn't remember him letting go of my legs. I remember opening my eyes a little bit, and I saw him digging around in the trunk. He was making a lot of noise.
Then what happened?
I just laid there to see what he was going to do. He came back by me. He sat right by me, right at my side. He was just leaning. I felt something go into my neck, something penetrating like it was going in, and he said, "Are you dead?" And then I felt it go out, and then he said it again, "Are you dead?" And I felt it go in and out again 2 more times. And then I passed out.
What's the next thing you remember?
I remember I opened my eyes just a little because if he was there, I didn't want him to know I was alive. So I stood up and I looked around for the car, and I didn't see him, and I didn't see the car. It was gone, and I walked down the road.
What did you notice was wrong?
I didn't have a shoe on, and one of my eyes was closed.
Did you feel any blood or see any blood at the time?
No, I didn't have a headache or anything. I felt real good. There was a little pain in my neck, but I knew what caused it, and that's all I felt.
Where did you go?
I walked down the road, and down the gravel paved road, and I saw 2 men, and I yelled to them, and they looked, but they didn't come. So I called again, and one of them came and helped me and asked what had happened, and I told him that I had been attacked.
Assuming that she was dead when he left the 17-year-old girl there, battered and lying in the dirt, well, that would prove to be Peter Piper's downfall. Over at the corner of Market and Cherry Streets, officers met with Piper at his place of employment and informed him that he fit the description of a person wanted for assault and rape. He was placed under arrest and advised of his rights. They had located his car, which matched their witness description, parked right outside. He repeatedly denied any knowledge of the assault. While they waited for the vice officers to arrive, the cops on scene say Piper twice requested that they let him wash his face and hands. He once even asked, "Do you want me to change my clothes?" When the vice captain arrived at the gas station where he worked, he was told that the subject had been made aware of his rights. He asked Piper flat out if he had the girl in his car that day, and Piper now was saying that he had, but that he had left her off at Cherry Street and Granville and then came to work. He told them that he had gotten there at about 7:45. The captain noted that he was wearing a green work uniform and he could see no stains resembling blood on his clothing. Later they would find stains on multiple items of his clothing, his thermal underwear, and the bottom of his pants, which is probably why he was keen on changing his clothing. Outside, officers took pictures of his Chevrolet and found some small links that they believed at the time to have come from a charm bracelet. They also took mud and dirt samples from various locations under the car before it was towed to the garage at the headquarters for further inspection. It was at this point that they learned that the crime scene itself was within the city limits, so the Grand Rapids vice captain ordered his officers to take Piper to the Walker police station for further questioning. Then he went to view the scene and evidence and make sure it was all collected and turned over to the Walker City Police Department. It's back at the Walker police station where we get our first glimpse at who Peter Piper really is. When the Walker police chief arrived to question the suspect, the Grand Rapids officers had already removed all of Piper's clothing and put them into containers for examination by the state lab in Lansing. Here, I would just like to give a shout-out to all these officers from different law enforcement entities who, in 1966, clearly understood the importance of immediately securing evidence and working together in a seamless, efficient manner. There was nobody jockeying for lead on the case. Everyone knew what to do, and they all worked together to serve up justice in the manner in which it's intended to be served. When Piper was escorted into the chief's office, he was offered a cup of coffee. Piper declined, but he asked for some aspirin. He said he had a terrible headache. He requested 5 tablets, insisting that anything less than that would not help. He was given 4, which he took with a glass of water. No sooner had he taken them did he say that his headache was getting worse. Piper was then advised that he did not have to talk to the police chief if he would rather have an attorney, but he declined. Then he was asked if there was someone he wanted to call, and Piper said he wanted to talk to his mother. He spoke to her on the phone for 22 minutes, according to the report, after which he was asked if he would like to talk about what happened. And he agreed. He said that he had left the house around 7:15 and was headed for work. He was driving down Granville Avenue and he saw a girl that he knew standing at the bus stop. He stopped and asked if she wanted a ride, and she said yes. She got in and they proceeded down Granville Avenue. But at this point, Piper conveniently said that he couldn't remember anything else, and that his headache was getting much worse. The report notes that he appeared to be in severe pain, so the police chief asked him how long he had had this headache, and he said that he had been having them for about 6 years, around the time that he had an accident. He said that they had been getting worse for the past few months. The police chief asked him if during these headaches he had ever committed any acts or had any lapses in memory. Piper alleged that he did do things that he didn't remember doing, and often there was times that he could not account for. The police chief asked whether he had been seeing a doctor about these headaches, and Piper said yes, he had, Dr. Eugene Kramer. He told the chief that the doctor had even given him some pain pills for the headaches, and they were at his mother's house. At this time, Piper said the headache was so bad, and the report notes there were even tears in his eyes. The chief instructed Piper to go out into the squad room and have a seat, while he called his doctor. Just a couple moments after he went into the other room, Peter Piper fell from his chair onto the floor and appeared to be unconscious. An ambulance was called to take him to the hospital, and it's noted that as this is happening, Piper's wife and 2 brothers are in the building and requests that he be taken to Grand Rapids Hospital. Once Piper had left for the hospital, the police chief got on the horn with Dr. Kramer. It turns out there had been an accident, a fall that Piper took in June of 1961, 5 years earlier. He had been treated for several fractures but no head injuries, and at no time had he ever mentioned headaches, nor had he ever been treated for headaches or ever prescribed medicine for headaches by this doctor. A short time later, a doctor from the Grand Rapids Hospital called to say they had done a spinal tap of Mr. Piper and they would have the results later, but so far they could find no cause for the headache or for him passing out. While the doctors did their workup, the chief and Patrolman James Vandermeulen proceeded to the county prosecutor's office. They presented their case and were granted a warrant for assault with intent to commit murder and assault with intent to commit rape by 5:45 that evening. While they were at the prosecutor's office, the doctor at the Grand Rapids Hospital, having completed his assessment of Piper, found the patient to be in good condition, and they found no reason for the alleged headaches, so he was released back to the Walker Police Department. One of their officers had him back down to the county jail by 7:30 that evening, where the chief and the county judge were waiting. Bond was set at $10,000, and the date for arraignment was set for March 17th, 1 week later. It's clear from the report that the Walker police chief, he got Peter Piper's number pretty quick. Faking a headache and going unconscious is a pretty bold move for an 18-year-old, though. But I guess if you've already stabbed someone in the neck, and the eye, and the face, and the stomach, what's a little trifle like faking an illness to stay out of jail? Peter Piper was a manipulator, right out of the gate. When you add a propensity for violence to that, what you get is a very scary combination. The victim gave a longer statement on March 23, 1966. 13 days later, she was still in Butterworth Hospital healing from her injuries, and the interview was conducted at her bedside. I am amazed at the poise of this brave young woman. What I take away from this whole story is what she endured, and the strength with which she endured it. On June 1st, a few months after the attack, Mary went with her mother and Patrolman Vandermeulen for a drive of the exact route she had taken in the car that day with Peter Piper. He clocked his mileage from the corner bus stop where she was picked up to the exact location on the dirt road where she was assaulted. It was a mere 4.5 miles, but I cannot even fathom how she felt having to take that ride again. On that day, police also took samples of hair from her head to be compared to the ones that they found on the bloody tire iron in the trunk of Peter Piper's Chevrolet on the day of the assault. So not only had she been stabbed and raped, but she was also beaten unconscious with a tire iron. Today in 2018, the phrase that comes to my mind, nevertheless, she persisted. The report notes the items of evidence that were turned over and collected. They were gearing up for trial in a little over a week. Their contents jump out at me as I read them. Her purse, $13 consisting of 2 5s and 3 1s, a small brown paper sack containing a sandwich, 3 chocolate-covered graham crackers and a candy bar, a biology textbook, a magazine, and 6 notebooks. All things a 17-year-old girl on her way to school might have, and they seem so foreign on the pages of a police report. I imagine that they stood out on the table and in front of the jury, too. All the evidence they found set against the backdrop of testimony they likely began hearing on day 1 of the trial, while the defendant sat at his table with his attorney, realizing that this was not going to end well for him. 2 days into the trial, with Judge Vanderploeg officiating, the defendant abruptly entered a plea of guilty to the charge of assault with intent to commit rape and murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. Later, his attorney would say, each hour of the trial, the prospects became worse and worse. Along with that, Mr. Piper became more and more dejected. He covered his face with his hands. He had his head down, and I became convinced at the time that he was in fact guilty. Of something, anyway. Up to that time, I had been told that he was not guilty. Years passed as they do. Seasons changed. So did the kind of music that played on the radio. For Mary, it was 18 years of suffering. From an article in the Detroit Free Press on January 8, 1984, written by staff writer Jack Kresniak. For 18 years, she has suffered. Besides the physical damage, stab wounds on her neck and a bashed-in face that had to be surgically reconstructed, her rape left her with emotional wounds that have never healed. Embarrassed, ashamed, and physically disfigured, she became an outcast to her high school classmates. She was never able to form a close relationship with a man. At age 34, she is alone. In those same 18 years, her attacker, Peter James Piper, has changed. An angry teenager when he walked into the Michigan training unit at Ionia, Piper wasted his time more or less, content to lose himself in prison. That is, until 7 years ago, when he became eligible for parole from his life sentence. Realizing that his only chance for freedom was to show that he had been rehabilitated, Piper tried to improve himself. He joined group therapy programs and taught water safety classes. He became a model prisoner, a promising painter and a tradesman. He won trustee status and later used his new carpentry skills at 3 county jails to remodel offices for county prosecutors, sheriffs, and the courts. He even made children's furniture for Christmas gifts. Now, at age 35, he is free. But Peter Piper did not win parole, even though some state parole board members, sheriff's officials, clergy, friends, and family had sought his release. Peter Piper escaped. This excerpt is from a Detroit Free Press article written in May of 1986. By December 18, 1983, a month before he escaped, Peter Piper had been a trustee at the Lake County Jail for nearly 17 months. In that time, he had remodeled the jail, the prosecutor's office, and the county courthouse. He turned the jail's adjoining house, where sheriffs used to live, into offices for deputies. He installed new security doors and electric wiring. Peter turned a basement room at the jail into a weightlifting training gym, the only such facility in Lake County. A weightlifter himself, he designed benches and built the equipment out of scrap iron. Piper ran the Lake County Jail commissary and handled hundreds of dollars belonging to fellow inmates. He was let out of his cell at night, without supervision, to pump gas for county ambulances and sheriff's vehicles. Despite many opportunities, Piper never ran. That is, until December 18th. It almost sounds like the Detroit Free Press writers are documenting specifics for a lawsuit, such as the supporting information that, I suppose, is meant to offer an excuse as to why a violent offender of a minor was allowed such lax supervision while in jail. Apparently, he was handy with a hammer. To me, the more informative part is where they note that Piper had laid around in prison, basically doing nothing until he became eligible for parole. Then, the man who had previously been described as angry suddenly became the picture of the reformed inmate. Did his jailers think that the kind of person capable of that type of violence, the kind that he had perpetrated on Mary, suddenly becomes a pussycat with a few years and a couple construction projects under his belt? What about his propensity to manipulate? Let's set aside his sudden and very obvious change in tone the moment parole became an option. Didn't any of them ever read the Walker Police Department report? Did they know about him faking a headache and pretending to be unconscious on the day he violently assaulted and raped a young girl? Or how he lied about it until he realized that he was caught? Peter Piper presented, from the very beginning, with some very obvious character traits that, while I won't try to diagnose medically, certainly stand out.
manipulative, skilled at deception, impulsivity, juvenile delinquency, lack of remorse. He even had the gall to blame the victim, insisting that Mary had demanded money for sex. When the parole board failed to vote in his favor and he felt that he had not gotten the ruling he deserved, Peter Piper planned his escape. Afterward, when he was in the wind, as they say, it was learned that he had packed his things, including a TV, radio, tools, and some clothing. He packed them all into garbage bags and left them by the dumpster outside the jail fence. Then, when he was buzzed outside one night to pump gas for the municipal vehicles, a job he had been doing regularly, he waited until the coast was clear, and then he simply walked away. At the time, Lake County Sheriff Robert Blevins said, quote, "Peter Piper is not a thief. If he was, he would have ripped me off. A man like this is going to have to turn to someone for help because he is not going to steal to survive." Now, call this foreshadowing, but that would not be the first or the last time that Sheriff Blevins got it very, very wrong with regard to Peter Piper. But he wasn't the only one that would have the wool pulled over their eyes with regard to Peter Piper. The undersheriff of Allegan County, Robert Hill, actually wrote to the parole board in April of 1982 saying, "I knew Pete to be a sincere, trustworthy, and dependable individual. Pete has never given up hope that someday someone will say, 'You have done enough time,' and give him a chance to prove himself." Oh, he would prove himself all right. The board had been periodically reviewing Piper's case for the 7 years since parole became an option, and some of the board members believed that he no longer posed a threat to the community, saying that the punitive objectives of the sentence had been met. Really? How do you decide how much punitive punishment one should get after taking a tire iron to the head of a young girl? And what about the raping and stabbing her a few times before leaving her for dead? He'd done 18 years in jail, so what was the calculation here? Was that like 2 years for each of the puncture wounds to her abdomen and neck, and 4 more for the rape and head bashing? How exactly did they come to that conclusion? It would sure be interesting to see their work on that calculation because Peter Piper proved them wrong. Every single person who believed that there had even been a possibility he was rehabilitated. They were all wrong. The exception was the Kent County Circuit Court judge, who had inherited the case from Judge Vanderploeg. At the time, the state had what was called the Lifer Law, which said that inmates serving life sentences could only be paroled after a public hearing and then only if the sentencing judge did not object. Piper and his family said that they were told he would get a lighter sentence if he pled guilty to the rape, but in a hearing in 1971, while trying to get a new trial, he changed his story and denied the rape, saying he got angry because the victim had demanded money for sex. Take that in nice and deep, folks. He was blaming the victim that he had viciously assaulted, now suggesting that the 17-year-old got in his car that day because she was prostituting herself. Piper's second wife was even quoted in the newspaper as saying, "He has never said he did not beat her, but he has always said he denied the rape." Oh, all right, well, if he denies it, it must be true, right? This guy sounds like he was surrounded by people who swallowed his line hook and sinker. The second wife, by the way, met him while he was in prison. He was 30. She was about to be a grandmother. Just as a little added backstory, Peter Piper had a brother who was serving a 6-year sentence for his 3rd rape conviction at the time. His mother, who alleged that their father had been abusive, denied making threatening calls, but said that she spoke to the Kent County prosecutor regularly. Her concern since the escape was for her son being harmed. "If they do hurt him, I'll bomb that Hall of Justice right to hell," she said, and then added that she wished the judge and prosecutor would croak. So I think we can assume we are not talking about the Cleavers here. His mother followed this with nasty comments about her son's accuser, who was forced to endure this back and forth in the press with every new story that had come out since he escaped. Mary had changed her name, but she still lived in the area, so she constantly had to relive the event and withstand the claims of his family that she had provoked him into beating her. Mary recounted for the newspaper that she had become an outcast during her last 2 years in high school after the attack, and she had no friends. She said that even after she moved on to college, former friends spread gossip about her. I became a dirty joke. I'm afraid every new person I meet will find out, or hear the rumor, and become repulsed by me. I'm lonely, and I don't let people get close to me. Mary was essentially victimized by Peter Piper, and then again by the students at her Catholic school, and then again with the resurgence of her story when he escaped 18 years later. And shame on her classmates. Shame on every student, teacher, parent, and administrator at Catholic Central High who, rather than supporting her, instead shunned her. And then think about the escape, 18 years later, and how scared she had to have been, knowing he was out there somewhere and clearly held a grudge against her. She remained strong, though. You can hear it in the quotes in the newspaper. He and I know the truth, but if he can convince you that he was the victim, God help us. At Piper's last public parole hearing, he said, "She will have inner scars for a long time, but so will I. And even if I am paroled or kept here, I will still feel really bad about what I did to her. It was a horrible thing." Yeah, that's the same guy who insists that she instigated the attack, playing the victim there. I find it truly shocking to read the press accounts of how he and his family blamed the victim, and how the sheriff and others spoke so highly of Piper, who, in the end, so clearly proved them all wrong. His supporters even asserted that they believed if she had died and he'd been sentenced to murder instead of rape, he probably would have already won parole. I have no idea what the skewed basis upon which they made that absurd claim was, but every single one of them were victimizing her all over again. They were making excuses for the violent offender who was now on the loose, who had broken the law and escaped from jail because he believed he was entitled to release, and when it was clear that he wasn't going to get that, he left. And not without their help, given they made it so easy for him to do so. His second wife told the press that he had planned to be home for Christmas, and the denial of his parole left him dejected. I can't begin to understand what Sheriff Blevins was thinking, or anyone that believed that violent offenders of the sort that Piper was could be rehabilitated. Rapists are among the highest repeat offenders, and if you're a violent rapist, that puts a pretty nasty character out on the street. In an interview, Sheriff Blevins said, "There is no doubt that what the young man did when he was 17 or 18 years old was a terribly, terribly heinous crime. But a lot of things can happen to a man in 18 years. I find this to be an interesting statement when you juxtapose it against something he said in his biography titled The Bulldog by Gordon Galloway. Of his early career at the Kent County Sheriff's Department, Blevins said, "It quickly became apparent that I wasn't going to be racing around in any black and white patrol car right away. Instead, I was to be a floor guard with daily exposure to these scruffy, low-life inmates. These inmates represented everything I detested. They didn't like me, and I surely had no use for them. If they had been arrested and put in here, surely they were guilty and deserved to be here." Perhaps Blevins had a come-to-Jesus moment during his career. Later, of the Peter Piper situation, when it was his ass in the hot seat for allowing the criminal to abscond, he said, "Our whole system is based on rehabilitation. We don't like to admit to warehousing people away. The system sometimes gives a guy a second chance. Pete probably felt he was never going to get that chance." What about Mary's chance? A lot of things can happen to the victim of violent assault in 18 years, too. What about her? There doesn't seem to be much concern for the victim, who could conceivably be in danger because of the escape, since it was widely known that Piper and his family blamed her for his current predicament. It's shocking to me that the press included such baseless accusations against his victim in their story about Peter Piper's escape. They didn't need to include that, and there was never any truth to it. The only thing that it did was victimize her more while simultaneously selling more papers. It certainly wasn't news. What was news was that a violent offender had been given way too much independence while incarcerated, and what happened was highly predictable. In fact, it had already happened, repeatedly.
in that article about the 71 prisoners sentenced to life who were serving time in the least secure prisons, the story notes, records show that 6 of the 8 lifers who have escaped from prison since 1978 and are still missing walked away from minimum security facilities. Peter Piper was one of them. He'd left a letter for Sheriff Blevins in his office before he absconded, which, in and of itself, illustrates the vast freedom to move around the facility that Piper had. In part, the note read, "I'm not taking off to get in trouble, I'm taking off to be free. I feel this is the only way to be free. I've done everything I can think of to get a parole, but I guess the parole board doesn't really care. I'm sorry. I don't want to do this, but what else can I do? Here are the keys." And it was signed, Pete. What was Sheriff Blevins' response? Well, he said he was grateful to Piper because he had keys for several jail doors, but he hadn't stolen any of the cash or cars to which he had access. One article in the Lansing State Journal was even titled, "Considerate Con Escapes Prison." Now, I don't know if the press treatment and Blevins' efforts to minimize the crime were for PR purposes, or if they all thought their words and actions were appropriate, but some of the coverage of this event was downright disgusting. I wanted very much to wrap my head around the thinking at the time, so I read the biography of Sheriff Blevins, the book I mentioned earlier, Bulldog. Another story that stood out was from his time with Kent County Sheriff's Department, working with what was called the E Unit, which were cops with paramedic certifications that would respond to scenes where there was serious medical injury. At some point during his tenure with the E Unit, new policies and procedures instituted by the captain had registered nurses riding along as partners, a policy that Blevins was very much against. While he understood that their medical training was far more advanced than theirs, in addition to his belief that they would just be another person to worry about keeping safe, given they had no police training, his main concern was that the nurses would put a strain on the marriages of the officers. Quote, "The RNs, for the most part, were single, pretty, and would be spending 8 hours with these guys each day or night. The officers would be spending more time with these women than they would their wives. They also would have plenty of work-related things in common with these women, while at home, they would hear about things like sick kids and things that need repair. This was dangerous territory, first an affair, then a divorce." Blevins even points to this as the reason he ended up leaving his full-time position with Kent County in 1976, when he would take a few years off to run his own horse stable before he jumped back into law enforcement with the Lake County Sheriff's Department. It's not hard to see how this type of mindset, when you're concerned with the effects that women on the job will have on the men who work there, might make one predisposed to making excuses for a violent male offender who you believe had done his time and been rehabilitated, over the safety of his female victim, who he clearly blamed for his incarceration. "We're going to be lucky if there are no bodies laying around Michigan someplace. He's not a good person." This was Mary being interviewed by phone after the escape. Piper escaped from jail the first time in December of 1983. He wouldn't be recaptured until November of 1985. That's a hell of a long time for a violent offender to be out there in the wind doing God knows what. 1 month after he escaped, Ruth Piper, his new wife, got a call from him. He told her that he was cold and broke, but he would rather freeze to death than be locked up. He also told her he'd lost all the money he had, which was $450, after leaving his bag unattended at a Chicago restaurant while using the bathroom. One has to wonder where he got the $450 that he had in the first place. "Don't worry, I won't break the law. I will not steal," he told her. She believed he was sleeping outside in parked cars or wherever he could find shelter. That same day, Piper called Sheriff Blevins, who said Piper told him he hoped he hadn't caused him or his department any embarrassment. He told the sheriff that he didn't have a gun or a knife and he had no intention of getting one. In the January 10, 1984 article, Sheriff Blevins said he wasn't sure Piper was capable of making it on the outside without help. "He's been shut in so long, he's like a canary flying with eagles." Like a canary flying with eagles. I still don't understand the sheriff's preoccupation with associating this violent offender with a sense of helplessness and harmlessness. It's absurd. I also can't figure out why it took law enforcement so long to find Piper, nor have I been able to ascertain just how much manpower and resources were even assigned to tracking him down. There isn't much public information about the manhunt portion of this story, which is telling in and of itself. I'm not sure there even was a manhunt to speak of. Not for long, anyway. What I did learn is that Sheriff Blevins was having a lot of other problems at this time. In 1983, around the time of Piper's first escape, the governor had formed a task force to investigate complaints of racial discrimination and brutality against his department after the shooting of a 61-year-old black man by a young white officer during a traffic stop in Baldwin, Michigan a few months prior. While the state police had cleared the deputy of misconduct, the incident, as well as an alleged pattern of behavior on the part of the Lake County Sheriff's Department against members of the black community, had caused a great deal of tension. Blevins alleged that a well-known activist named Robert F. Williams, who was a member of the local redress committee, was stirring the pot. Williams was one of a group of people who were responsible for organizing a grassroots organization in Lake County dedicated to maintaining the human rights of residents. It was called the People's Association for Human Rights. Williams was a well-known black civil rights activist who advocated armed self-defense in response to violence and lived in Cuba and China until 1969. He also served in the military, lived in Detroit for a time, and eventually returned to local activism, fighting to eliminate prostitution, police brutality, and local police corruption in Baldwin, Michigan, where he spent the last couple decades of his life. Blevins said Williams was deliberately misrepresenting incidents involving the sheriff's department. "Most residents get along pretty darn good with the sheriff's department," he said. That's not really how the black community saw it, though. It's not hard to see how Williams and Blevins would clash. The civil rights activist and the guy who made Ted Nugent an honorary deputy.
Well, may I, the Motor City Madman, Uncle Ted, the strap assassin, would like to introduce the new warrior of Lake County, Sheriff Dennis Robinson.
Tell me about how long have you known Dennis?
I'm sure we met off and on a long time ago.
Yeah, I started here as a reserve in 1989.
Okay, I was already sworn in 83.
Yeah, we met sometime after that. I'm not sure when. But you've been a part of our departments as long as I've been here.
Yep,
so.
yep. I think somebody said I'm the oldest Lake County Sheriff Deputy still alive or something like that. I was sworn in under Bob Blevins, a great man,
Yep.
who now lives in the Upper Peninsula. Back in 83, around that era, I started doing drive-alongs and ride-alongs, and we trained together, and he swore me in because I was up here all the time.
Oh, yeah.
A month after the two-day task force came to the Baldwin area to investigate, a Michigan House Civil Rights Committee ordered a 4-member subcommittee to travel to Baldwin to investigate charges of discrimination by the Sheriff's Department. Blevins was not pleased. He told them he would not testify if they came to Baldwin because utter chaos prevailed when the last group came to investigate. Blevins said that the earlier committee was not able to control local residents, who shouted down his testimony. He believed that another committee investigation would prove to be nothing but, in his words, a toothless tiger. At the time, Representative Ethel Terrell said, "We're looking at a human rights problem." She cited a letter that the committee had received from the People's Association for Human Rights out of Idlewild, which described the hearing as the most painful blow we have yet endured. The letter went on to say, quite ominously, "Experience over 3 years has shown us that each time we complain, to no avail, the harassment and brutality worsens, so we have no choice but to appeal to you and others in the legislature for help." There had also been an incident earlier in the summer where Sheriff Blevins was shot. He called it an ambush, although there is almost no public information about the incident, other than these facts printed in the paper. Blevins alleged that he was shot in the arm as he drove his patrol car east of Baldwin one night around 10:40 p.m. He said a van or pickup pulled up alongside him and fired a shotgun at him. He said he had also received threatening phone calls. One of the few newspaper accounts of the story reported, quote, "It was not immediately known if Blevins was on patrol at the time of the shooting or whether anyone was with him.
There was never an arrest in that case, nor is there any corroborating information out there about the event. Things only got worse for Blevins. There was a feud between he and the Lake County Commission chairman, a man named James Nelson. They were sparring in the newspaper over budget cuts. Blevins claimed Nelson was trying to destroy the department. Nelson claimed that the sheriff's department had not operated within its budget since Blevins had become sheriff in 1980. 1 month before Peter Piper walked out of his prison unattended, the state announced they were going to audit Lake County financial records to check for alleged misuse of public money, as well as review the sheriff's department policies. Dale Davis, the director of the Michigan Sheriff's Association, said there had apparently been, quote, for many, many years a tremendous misuse of federal and state funds. According to letters received confidentially by Governor Blanchard's legal counsel during the writing of the report by the committee, there were allegations that people in the county government had created debts or incurred financial obligations that were improper. This apparently led to the audit. The report also noted that the county was a victim of a total breakdown of police-community relations and suffered from a deep distrust of local government. The report recommended that county employees, including the sheriff's department, receive racial sensitivity training and that deputies needed to, quote, learn better ways of dealing with domestic violence. They also recommended a county advisory board be established to investigate complaints about law enforcement, something Blevins had agreed to years earlier but never followed through with. There were also recommendations regarding the community itself, including working with the state on an economic development plan in the county, which had once been a thriving black resort area. Idlewild was called the Black Eden in its heyday, from the 1920s to the 1960s. After the 1964 Civil Rights Act opened other resort areas up to African Americans, its popularity waned and it was no longer the only vacation destination available to them. By August of 1984, after the audit, and months after Peter Piper had killed the Thompsons while still on the run, the Attorney General's office charged Sheriff Blevins with 3 counts of mishandling county money. Apparently, he had deposited money into what he called a Sheriff's Department contingency fund set up by him that should have gone to the county treasurer. Turns out, those anonymous sources who had contacted the Michigan legislature were right. The whole matter is a can of worms from the get-go, Blevins said, claiming political motivations were behind the charges against him, an effort to thwart his upcoming re-election bid. That motivation may very well have been the case, but it didn't change the fact that what he'd done wasn't legal. Blevins insisted that he had no knowledge of any money going into the wrong account and they were charging the wrong man. He pled not guilty and went further to say, the allegations against me are made by previous and former employees of the Lake County Sheriff's Department who are obviously disgruntled, dissatisfied, and, in all honesty, ineffective and poor examples of law enforcement officers. So, for those of you keeping track, that's pretty much the entire black community and most of his department now against him. Apparently. That year, November 1984, Sheriff Blevins lost his job during the general election by fewer than 300 votes. He pled no contest that same month to misdemeanor charges of willful neglect of duty. The case would have gone on trial the following year, including more felony and misdemeanor charges, but after his plea, the other counts were dismissed. At his sentencing, the Isabella County judge who presided over the case had criticized his conduct throughout. While he did not think the sheriff had benefited from the fund personally, he did believe the facts suggested that Blevins had set up the fund and should have admitted his responsibility in the matter. In early 1985, a little over a year after Peter Piper had escaped, and still not been recaptured, Sheriff Blevins was found guilty and ordered to pay $1,000 in fines and costs associated with his mishandling of county money. He was also ordered to either repay Lake County the $3,200 he put into the sheriff's contingency fund or prove that it was used for law enforcement purposes. So, while all this was going on, who was looking for Peter Piper? He had escaped on Blevins' watch, but who was responsible for getting him back? Was anyone even trying? I had to wonder, given the absence of any public information, how much work was being done in that regard, while Blevins was so busy being sued by the state and dealing with investigations related to discrimination by his community. Peter Piper was recaptured in November of 1985 in Grand Rapids, near his sister's home on 44th Street, by the officer who was investigating the assaults on prostitutes in the area. The 2 years that Piper was free correspond almost exactly to the time frame when all of Sheriff Blevins' troubles were going down. When Peter Piper was recaptured in '85, his supporters still insisted he was innocent, even after he was convicted of a series of rapes and robberies of prostitutes. I will tell you their story because I believe those women are the heroes here. After his first recapture, Mary called the Detroit Free Press and scolded the reporter about his last story. Quote, "It made a terrific story, but boy, you hurt a lot of people." After his escape, she left the state because she was in fear of her life. Meanwhile, the prosecutor built his case against Piper for the murders they had since attributed to him, based in part, according to authorities, on a letter that he wrote to a friend, which police said contained details only someone present during the killings of the Thompsons would know. We'll delve into the murder of the Thompsons in a later episode, after we discuss the prostitutes. But 4 years later, in 1988, while he was in the Osceola County Jail in Reed City awaiting trial, he escaped again. This time he brought a friend. Piper absconded with Mitchell Lund, a convicted burglar. They escaped around 9 p.m. on a Thursday night after beating up a jail guard and tying him up. At the time, Lieutenant Dallas Jenks, the administrator for the Osceola County Jail, said, "Both of them are considered to be extremely dangerous. I'm nervous about both of them being out of my jail, but Piper would be the one I'd be most nervous about." Lund was arrested around 3 p.m. the next afternoon in a residential area of Big Rapids. During this time, a woman from Newaygo sent a letter to the Detroit Free Press insisting that Piper had been with her. "They are really railroading him again. I know he is not guilty, as he spent the whole 4 days in my home." Well, he wasn't even out 4 days. It was more like 30 hours. The Mecosta County Sheriff's Department finally caught him at 2:50 in the morning a few days after his escape, alongside US 131 near Big Rapids. He was muddy and bruised from spending 2 days moving around in the woods and marshland between Reed City and Big Rapids. Police had been receiving a steady stream of tips about sightings of him in the area. He was so tired he wasn't even able to run from the deputies who approached him. At 41 years old, it would be the last time Peter Piper would get a taste of freedom. Today, he lives at the Lakeland Correctional Facility in Coldwater, Michigan. The website says it provides mainly dormitory-style housing, containing 16 units, which includes housing for geriatric and pre-geriatric prisoners. As far as security, the perimeter includes a double fence, electronic detection systems, razor ribbon wire, and a patrol vehicle. It's probably unlikely that he would ever be able to escape again, but given his propensity toward manipulation, I hope they're keeping a good eye on him. Piper always seemed to be able to manipulate people into lying to the press for him. Every time, with every escape, his first victim had to watch as the media reported the false allegations against her. In a 1988 article in the Detroit Free Press, she was upset that the media had, quote, made a folk hero out of a man who, in her opinion, was a potential killer. By that point, she had moved out of state, but still hadn't gotten over what had happened to her all those years ago when she was just a girl. She thought that the press was far too sympathetic to Piper, and I would have to agree. Your story needed 2 victims. No, he is not a victim. He has a lot of victims, but he is not a victim. There's been a lot of times I wish that he had done the job better. He was a stinker. I wish someone would do him in.